I spotted it through my binoculars while leading my patrol through the dense Alaskan wilderness surrounding Fort Greely, buildings where no buildings should be. "Hold position," I said to my squad, adjusting the focus to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The structures stood about 2 miles northwest of our location, rooftops and chimneys visible above the tree line. According to our maps and briefings, this area was uninhabited, nothing but forest and mountains for miles. "Torres, what do you make of this?" I handed the binoculars to Corporal Torres, who stood next to me. He raised them to his eyes and went quiet for several seconds. "Looks like a small town, Staff Sergeant, but that can't be right." I pulled out my map and double-checked our coordinates. We were exactly where we were supposed to be, 26 miles northeast of Fort Greely, on a routine patrol to check for any unusual activity along this section of the military land boundary. The base had received reports of civilian hikers straying onto restricted areas. Simple mission. Nothing in our briefing mentioned a town. "Change of plans," I told my squad. "We're going to investigate those structures. Standard formation. Stay alert." My 5-person squad fell in behind me as I led them toward the unexpected settlement. Private First Class. Kim moved with characteristic precision on my right flank, while Corporal Torres took position on my left. Private Rodriguez, Specialist Chen, and Sergeant Thompson spread out behind us, maintaining textbook patrol formation. As we got closer, the town came fully into view. Not just a few cabins or hunting lodges, but an actual town. At least 30 houses arranged along what looked like a main street, plus larger buildings that appeared to be a general store, a church with a white steeple, and what might have been a schoolhouse. "This isn't on any map," Sergeant Thompson said, voicing what we were all thinking. "Might be old mining settlement," suggested Chen. "There are abandoned towns all over Alaska, but this didn't look abandoned, at least not in the usual sense." As we approached the first house, I noticed the paint was fresh, the windows intact, the wooden steps leading to the front door free of rot. This wasn't some crumbling relic from the gold rush days. This place looked maintained. Yet there were no people, no movement, no smoke from chimneys, no vehicles. The silence was complete except for our boots crunching on the gravel road that led into town. "Form a perimeter," I ordered. "Rodriguez, watch our 6. Everyone else, stay sharp." We moved cautiously down what appeared to be the main street. The whole town looked like a movie set. Picture-perfect houses with white picket fences, the general store with a covered porch, the church with its neat rows of windows. But not a single person in sight. "Permission to check the first house, Staff Sergeant?" asked Kim. I nodded. "Torres, go with her. Standard room clearing procedure." They moved toward the nearest house, a 2-story blue clapboard with shuttered windows and a porch swing. I watched as they approached the front door, weapons ready. Torres knocked and announced our presence. No response. He tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily. I waited with the rest of the squad as they disappeared inside. A minute later, Torres called from the doorway. "Staff Sergeant, you need to see this." The interior of the house hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything was left behind, not just furniture, but the small details of daily life. Plates with rotting food sat on the dining table. A newspaper lay open on an armchair. Family photos hung on the walls. It looked as if the occupants had simply vanished in the middle of dinner. "Check the date on that newspaper," I said to Torres. He picked it up carefully. "Fairbanks Daily News Miner, March 28, 1952. I moved through the house, taking in details. The kitchen had dishes soaking in a sink of long evaporated water. The refrigerator contained food turned to unrecognizable mush. Upstairs, beds were neatly made in 2 bedrooms, one for adults, one with twin beds that must have belonged to children. Clothes hung in closets. A hairbrush sat on a vanity with strands of hair still caught in the bristles. "It's like they all just disappeared," Kim said quietly. We rejoined the rest of the squad outside and shared what we'd found. I made a decision. We need to search the entire town, document everything, take samples where appropriate. Standard search pattern, teams of 2. Rodriguez with Chen, Thompson with Kim. Torres, you're with me. Radio check every 15 minutes. For the next 8 hours, we methodically searched every building in town. The pattern was the same everywhere, homes left intact. I spent 4 days trying to make sense of what we'd found. After searching every building in that impossible town, we documented everything and returned to base with samples, photographs, and detailed reports. The whole experience left me unsettled. No signs of struggle, no evacuation, just gone. Sleep had become my enemy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those abandoned homes, felt the stillness of a place where time had stopped. Questions haunted me. Where had everyone gone? Why was there no record of this town? And why did it feel like the empty buildings were watching us? The harsh shake of my shoulder startled me awake. Lieutenant Colonel Wells stood over my bunk, her face tight with urgency. "Reeves, get up. Now." I grabbed my watch from beside the bed. 3 in the morning. My body protested as I swung my legs over the side of the bunk, immediately alert despite the early hour. "What's happened, ma'am?" I asked, reaching for my uniform pants. "Those teenagers you mentioned in your report about the town?" Wells held up her tablet. "They found it too." My stomach dropped. I quickly dressed as Wells showed me what looked like social media posts, shaky videos and photos of teenagers exploring the same buildings we'd documented. The timestamp showed they'd been posted just hours ago. "How did civilians even get out there?" I asked, lacing my boots with practiced efficiency. "That's what you're going to find out," Wells said. "I want you to take your squad, locate these kids, and get them out of there immediately. Colonel Harrison is concerned about potential contamination of the site until we understand what we're dealing with." 20 minutes later, I had assembled my team in the motor pool. Despite the early hour, everyone looked alert. Torres checking equipment with his usual thoroughness, Kim reviewing the maps, Rodriguez talking quietly with Chen while Thompson loaded our packs into the vehicles. "Listen up," I said, gathering them around. "We're heading back to the town. A group of teenagers has trespassed onto military land and found it. Our mission is simple: locate them, remove them from the area, and ensure they understand the seriousness of their breach." Questions? "Are we bringing sample kits again?" Chen asked. I shook my head. "This is strictly retrieval. Get in, get the civilians, get out." We took 2 military vehicles and drove through the darkness, headlights cutting through the dense fog that had settled over the landscape. Nobody spoke much during the journey. I could sense the same unease in my squad that had been gnawing at me since we'd discovered the town. Something about that place wasn't right. The sky was just beginning to lighten when we reached the coordinates. First light revealed the town exactly as we'd left it. Unnervingly perfect and still. But now, parked at what served as the entrance to the main street, sat a battered blue van with Alaska plates. "Looks like our trespassers arrived in style," Torres commented as we pulled up behind it. "Kim, check the vehicle," I ordered. "Everyone else, standard search formation. These are just kids, but stay alert." Kim circled the van, peering inside. "Empty, Staff Sergeant, but there's food wrappers, sleeping bags. Looks like they might have spent the night." That information didn't sit well with me. Nobody should spend the night in that place. We moved down the main street, the morning light casting long shadows from the buildings. I noticed fresh footprints in the dust, smaller than our military boots, casual sneaker treads heading in multiple directions. A crash from inside the general store caught our attention. I signaled the squad to take position around the entrance. With Torres and Rodriguez flanking the door, I called out, "This is Staff Sergeant Reeves, United States Army. Come out with your hands visible." Silence, then whispers, followed by the creaking of old floorboards. 4 teenagers emerged from the store, blinking in the morning light. 2 girls, 2 boys, all looking to be college age or younger. One girl, auburn-haired with a camera around her neck, stepped forward. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, trying to sound confident despite the nervous glance she threw at my squad's weapons. "You're trespassing on restricted military land," I said. "How did you find this place?" The girl, who later introduced herself as Emma Watson, explained they were urban explorers from Fairbanks who'd heard rumors about an abandoned settlement. They'd spotted it while hiking and decided to check it out, posting their discovery online. "Look, we didn't know it was military property," said one of the boys, Connor Davis, as he identified himself. "Muscular build, confrontational stance. There's no signs, no fences. There are clearly marked boundaries on all public maps," I countered. "You crossed those boundaries illegally. I need identification from all of you, and then you're leaving immediately." As they reluctantly produced IDs, I noticed several of them were carrying small items from the store. Old cans, bottles, even what looked like a vintage toy. "Put everything back," I ordered. "Nothing leaves this site." The second girl, Ashley Martinez, according to her ID, looked around nervously. "We didn't take much, just souvenirs." "This isn't a tourist attraction," I said firmly. "This entire area is under investigation. Anything you remove could compromise that investigation." They grudgingly returned the items to the store while my squad maintained positions around them. As they gathered their backpacks, Emma suddenly froze. "Wait, where's Jake?" The three other teenagers looked at each other, realization dawning on their faces. "He went to check out the houses on the north end," Tyler Brooks, the fourth teenager, said. "Like 2 hours ago? He said he'd meet us back at the store." "And you didn't think to check on him?" Ashley asked, her voice rising. "He always wanders off when we explore places," Connor said defensively. "He likes taking pictures alone." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Someone alone in those houses, potentially for hours. "Torres, Kim, escort these 4 back to the vehicles and secure them there," I ordered. "Rodriguez, Chen, Thompson, you're with me. We're going to find the missing person." As Torres and Kim led the teenagers away, I turned to the remaining squad members. "Standard search pattern, house by house. Call out regularly. This Jake Sullivan is approximately 19 years old, auburn hair, carrying a camera." We started moving toward the north end of town, where the houses stood in perfect, eerie rows. Each step felt heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, more wrong than just a missing teenager. "Staff Sergeant," Rodriguez asked quietly as we approached the first house, "what do you think happened to the people who lived here?" I checked my weapon, a habitual gesture more than a necessity. "I don't know, Rodriguez, but I don't think we want the same thing happening to a civilian on our watch." As we began systematically searching the northern houses, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. Something about this town wanted people to stay. I was determined not to let it claim anyone else. I led my team through the northern section of the town, moving from house to house in our search for Jake Sullivan. The morning light did nothing to dispel the unnatural stillness that blanketed the area. Each building we checked yielded the same result. Furniture frozen in time, personal belongings untouched since 1952, but no sign of the missing teenager. "Jake Sullivan," I called out periodically. "This is Staff Sergeant Reeves with the U.S. Army. If you can hear me, respond." Only silence answered. We had searched 6 houses with no luck, and I was beginning to worry that the kid might have wandered beyond the town limits. Rodriguez maintained a professional demeanor, but I could see tension in the way he gripped his weapon. Chen methodically checked each room with increasing speed, while Thompson kept glancing back toward the vehicles as if eager to leave. "Let's expand our search back toward the main street," I said, after we finished clearing another empty house. He might have circled around while we were searching. We moved out of the residential area and back toward the center of town. The road was eerily quiet, our boots crunching on loose gravel, the only sound breaking the silence. I tried the radio again to check in with Torres and Kim, who confirmed the other teenagers were still secured at the vehicles. That's when I saw him. A lone figure stood perfectly still in a doorway about halfway down the main street. The silhouette was unmistakably that of a young man positioned at the entrance to what appeared to be a barber shop. He wasn't moving, not shifting weight, not turning his head, not showing any signs of awareness as we approached. "I think that's him," I said, pointing. "Jake Sullivan." No response, not even a twitch. I signaled for the team to spread out as we approached. Standard procedure when dealing with an unresponsive civilian who might be injured or in shock. "Jake Sullivan," I called again when we were about 20 feet away. "Are you okay? We're here to help you." The figure remained motionless, frozen like a statue in the doorway. Something about his stillness made my skin crawl. This wasn't the normal hesitation of someone startled or afraid. This was a complete absence of natural movement. "Cover me," I told Rodriguez, then approached slowly with my weapon lowered but ready. When I reached the young man, I still couldn't see his face, which was turned slightly toward the interior of the building. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans that matched the description his friends had given. A camera hung around his neck. "Jake?" I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. He felt cold through his clothing, though not corpse cold. Just unnaturally cool, as if he'd been standing outside all night. His body was rigid under my touch, muscles tensed to an impossible degree. I moved around to his front, stepping between him and the doorway to get a look at his face. The sight hit me with such visceral horror that I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the threshold. I fell hard onto the wooden porch, my weapon clattering beside me. Where Jake's eyes should have been were two dark, empty sockets, not bloody or wounded, but clean and hollow, as if the eyes had simply ceased to exist. His mouth was pulled into a grotesque parody of stillness, sewn shut with thick black thread and crude, uneven stitches that pierced the flesh of his lips. I tried to speak, but couldn't find my voice. My training, my experience, nothing had prepared me for this. Jake Sullivan stood before me, blind and silenced, yet somehow still standing. "What the?" Rodriguez came up behind me, his words cutting off as he saw Jake's face. "Holy..." A flicker of movement caught my attention from the corner of my eye. I turned my head slightly and saw a pale face watching from a window across the street. Then another in the building next door, and another. I pushed myself up on shaky legs and turned in a slow circle, suddenly aware of a presence that hadn't been there moments before. In every window of every building on the main street, figures stood watching us. Men, women, children, all with the same empty eye sockets, all with mouths sewn shut with the same crude stitches. "Staff Sergeant," Rodriguez's voice trembled as he grabbed my arm. "Look." I followed his gaze to see more figures emerging from doorways and alleys. They moved with unnatural coordination, not walking so much as gliding forward in perfect unison, their eyeless faces all turned toward us. Chen and Thompson were already backing away, weapons raised but faces pale with shock. "Run," I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. Then louder. "Run!" Rodriguez yanked me to my feet with enough force to nearly dislocate my shoulder. Chen and Thompson had already turned and were sprinting toward the vehicles at the edge of town. I grabbed my weapon and ran after them, Rodriguez at my side. I didn't look back, but I could feel them behind us. Dozens of eyeless faces tracking our movement without sight. Dozens of sewn mouths unable to call out yet somehow communicating their hunger. My lungs burned as we sprinted the length of the main street. I could see our vehicles ahead. Torres standing with his weapon ready, looking past us with an expression of pure horror. "Get in the vehicles!" I shouted as we approached. "Now!" Torres scrambled into the driver's seat of the lead vehicle while Kim stood by the passenger door, her face ashen. "The teenagers," Kim said as I reached her. "Something's wrong with them?" I looked at the 4 teens we'd left with Torres and Kim. They stood in a perfect line facing the town, completely motionless. Their eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. When I moved in front of Emma Watson, her gaze didn't track me. It was as if she was looking through me at something only she could see. "Are they Rodriguez couldn't finish the sentence. I checked Emma's eyes, still intact, thankfully, and waved my hand in front of her face. No response. I grabbed her arm to pull her toward the vehicle, but her body was rigid, resisting movement as if weighing hundreds of pounds. "They won't move," Torres called from the driver's seat. "We tried everything." I looked back toward town and saw the eyeless figures had reached the midpoint of the main street, moving toward us with that same unnatural gliding motion. There had to be at least 50 of them now, more than I'd seen in any of the houses during our search. A decision crystallized in my mind with terrible clarity. "Leave them," I ordered. "Everyone in the vehicles now." "Sir?" Kim looked at me in shock. "We can't just—" "That's an order, Private First Class," I snapped. "In, now." My squad obeyed, piling into the 2 military vehicles. I took one last look at the teenagers, still standing like statues, still staring at the town, before climbing into the passenger seat beside Torres. "Go," I said. "Maximum speed back to base." Torres hit the accelerator and the vehicle lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. In the side mirror, I could see the eyeless figures reaching the edge of town where the 4 teenagers stood waiting. As we sped away, the figures surrounded the teens, engulfing them in a mass of pale limbs and sewn faces. I turned away from the mirror and faced forward, focusing on the road ahead. No one spoke as we raced back toward Fort Greely. There was nothing to say. In my mind, I was already rehearsing how I would explain to Colonel Harrison that we had left 4 American civilians behind. But the truth was, I wasn't sure those teenagers were civilians anymore, or even human. Whatever had happened in that town, whatever force had taken Jake Sullivan's eyes and sewn his mouth shut, had claimed them all. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it had nearly claimed us too. I burst through the door of Colonel Harrison's office without knocking, still covered in dust from the road. My squad trailed behind me, their faces ashen and eyes wide with shock. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," Harrison said, standing up from his desk. "What is the meaning of—" "Sir, we need to go back immediately," I cut him off, my voice raw. "We left civilians behind." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he took in my disheveled appearance and the state of my squad. "Close the door," he ordered. I nodded at Thompson, who shut the door behind us. The small office felt suffocating with all of us crammed inside. Torres stood with his back against the wall, breathing heavily. Kim kept rubbing her hands together as if trying to wash something off them. Chen stared at the floor, while Rodriguez kept glancing over his shoulder at the closed door. "Report," Harrison said, his voice calm but edged with steel. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. Finding the teenagers, the search for the missing one, Jake Sullivan with his sewn mouth and empty eye sockets, the dozens of eyeless figures emerging from the buildings, and our retreat leaving the 4 teenagers behind when they became unresponsive. Harrison listened without interruption, his face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he picked up his phone. "This is Colonel Harrison. I need a full platoon, assembled and ready to move in 30 minutes. Heavy weapons, ground-penetrating radar, and detection equipment." He paused, listening to the response. "That's correct. Full combat load. This is a Code 3 priority." He hung up and looked at me. "You're leading us back there, Staff Sergeant." Within the hour, we were on the move. 4 transport vehicles carried 40 heavily armed soldiers back toward the coordinates where we'd found the town. I rode in the lead vehicle with Harrison, guiding the convoy through the dense Alaskan wilderness. No one spoke much during the journey, the soldiers who hadn't seen what we had looked confused but alert, while my squad sat rigid with tension. "We'll find them," Harrison said quietly, breaking the silence as we neared the coordinates. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In my mind, I kept seeing those teenagers standing motionless as the eyeless figures surrounded them. I kept seeing Jake Sullivan's face, the crude black stitches pulling his lips into that grotesque sealed line. The convoy slowed as we approached the GPS coordinates where the town had stood just hours earlier. I leaned forward, scanning the tree line, expecting to see rooftops emerging above the pines. There was nothing. "Stop here," I said to the driver, checking the GPS unit again. This is it. This is the exact location. The vehicles pulled to a halt in a clearing. I stepped out, turning in a slow circle, disoriented. Where there should have been a main street lined with buildings, there was only unbroken forest. Where the general store had stood, pine trees grew thick and tall, their trunks massive with age. "Are you certain of these coordinates, Staff Sergeant?" Harrison asked, coming to stand beside me. "Yes, sir," I said, checking the GPS again. "This is exactly where we found the town, twice." Harrison called the platoon together, organizing them into search teams. "I want every inch of this area covered. Look for foundations, debris, anything that suggests there was a settlement here. Detection teams. I want ground-penetrating radar sweeps in a grid pattern. If there's anything under the surface, I want to know about it." The soldiers spread out, moving through the forest with professional efficiency. I stood rooted to the spot, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew had been here. The blue van that had belonged to the teenagers was gone too. There wasn't a single tire track, not a footprint, not a scrap of evidence that anyone had ever been here. "Sir," I said to Harrison, who was studying a map, "there was a town here, a full town with at least 30 buildings. My entire squad saw it. We were inside the houses. We found newspapers from 1952. Harrison looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "I believe you saw something, Reeves. The question is what?" For 6 hours, the platoon searched the area. They used metal detectors that found nothing but the occasional tin can from old campsites. The ground-penetrating radar showed undisturbed soil with no sign of foundations or buried structures. Dogs brought to track the teenagers' scents found nothing to follow. As the daylight began to fade, Harrison called the search to a halt. The soldiers gathered back at the vehicles, confusion evident in their hushed conversations. I overheard snippets, waste of time, and wild goose chase from those who hadn't been with us before. "Attention," Harrison called, silencing the murmurs. "What you've been part of today is classified. Upon return to base, each of you will sign non-disclosure agreements. This operation never happened. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir" followed. On the drive back, I sat silent in the passenger seat. My squad looked defeated, avoiding eye contact with each other and the other soldiers. Torres kept checking his weapon as if expecting an attack. Kim stared out the window, her face blank. Chen had his eyes closed, but I could tell from his breathing he wasn't sleeping. Rodriguez and Thompson whispered to each other occasionally, falling silent whenever anyone looked their way. Back at Fort Greely, we were immediately taken to a secure briefing room. Legal officers handed out non-disclosure forms, with severe penalties listed for violations. I signed mine without reading it thoroughly, too numb to care about the consequences. Harrison pulled me aside after the briefings. "I need everything, Reeves. Photos, samples, notes, anything you collected from the previous visits." I handed over my field notebook and the USB drive containing all our photos. "The physical samples are in the lab, sir." He nodded. "They'll be collected. This incident is now classified at the highest level. Do not discuss it with anyone, including your squad." "What about the missing teenagers, sir?" I asked. "Their families will be looking for them." "That's being handled through appropriate channels," Harrison said, his voice firm. "Your involvement in this matter's over, Staff Sergeant. I suggest you focus on your regular duties." Back in my quarters that night, I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyeless faces, those sewn mouths. I saw Jake Sullivan standing in that doorway, frozen in place. I saw the other teenagers, standing motionless as the figures from the town surrounded them. Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep and moved to my desk. Opening my laptop, I began searching Alaska missing persons cases from 1952. It took some digging, but eventually I found archived newspaper articles from the Fairbanks Daily News Miner, the same paper we'd found in that house. A headline from April 10, 1952 caught my attention. Search continues for missing settlement. I clicked through to the full article and felt a chill run through me as I read. The article described a small town called Mill Creek, approximately 30 miles northeast of Fort Greely, whose entire population of 76 residents had seemingly vanished without explanation in late March 1952. Search parties had found the town abandoned, with meals half-eaten on tables and personal belongings left behind. No bodies were found, and no signs of struggle or evacuation were evident. The article mentioned search efforts were being scaled back after 2 weeks with no leads. I searched for follow-up articles and found a small piece from April 25th reporting that the case had been turned over to federal authorities. After that, nothing, as if the entire incident had been forgotten or deliberately buried. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my shaking hands. Mill Creek, a town of 76 people who vanished in 1952, leaving everything behind, just like the town we'd found. Just like the town that had now vanished itself, taking 4 more people with it. I opened a new document and began typing everything I could remember about our 3 encounters with the town. I needed to record it all before the details faded, before the official silence buried the truth. Those teenagers deserved to be found. The people of Mill Creek deserved to be remembered. As I typed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somehow the town was still out there, waiting, and I couldn't escape the image of Jake Sullivan's face, his empty eye sockets seeming to watch me even in their blindness, his sewn lips holding back secrets I was only beginning to uncover. I spent hours each night at my desk, piecing together the truth about Mill Creek while the rest of the base slept. The documents and notes spread across my workspace grew into an obsessive tapestry of connections, dates, and names. This became my routine over the next 3 months, perform my regular duties during the day, then dive back into the mystery that wouldn't let me go. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford and barely wanted. When I did sleep, those sewn faces waited for me, standing motionless in dreams that felt too real to dismiss. The teenagers, Emma Watson, Tyler Brooks, Ashley Martinez, Connor Davis, and Jake Sullivan were officially listed as missing persons from Fairbanks. Their case files classified them as presumed lost in wilderness, a convenient explanation that asked no difficult questions about towns that appeared and disappeared. I found their addresses through military databases I shouldn't have accessed. The risk of disciplinary action meant nothing compared to the weight of leaving them behind. The Watson family lived in a modest 2-story house on the outskirts of Fairbanks. Emma's mother invited me in when I showed up in civilian clothes, identifying myself only as someone who might have information. The living room walls displayed Emma's photos, landscapes, and abandoned places she'd explored, all showing her talent for capturing forgotten beauty. She was acting so strange the week before, Mrs. Watson said, clutching a tissue. Her eyes were red-rimmed from tears that had become part of her daily existence. Sitting up at night, staring at blank walls for hours. Staring at walls? I asked, the hairs on my neck rising. Mrs. Watson nodded. When I asked what she was looking at, she said, "They're watching from the other side." I thought she meant it metaphorically. You know how artistic she is. Was. She showed me Emma's journal, filled with increasingly disturbing entries from the weeks before her dissipation. Something's calling us to that place in the woods. I can hear it when I close my eyes. The watching ones. They need new eyes to see. Similar stories emerged from the other families. Tyler's father described finding his son standing motionless in their backyard at 3 a.m, staring into the trees. Ashley's roommate reported hearing her whispering to empty corners of their apartment. Connor's girlfriend said he'd drawn dozens of sketches of the same house he claimed to see in his dreams. I took notes on everything, adding to my growing wall of evidence. Each new piece confirmed what I already knew, but couldn't prove. Something had called those kids to that town long before they physically arrived. The Alaska State Library archives gave me access to historical records that painted an even more disturbing picture. In 1891, a hunting party of 7 men vanished near the same coordinates. Search parties reported finding an abandoned native settlement that, when they returned with additional help, could not be relocated. In 1922, a family of 12 and their neighbors disappeared while traveling to Fairbanks. Again, search parties found an abandoned mining town that later couldn't be found again. Then in 1952, the entire population of Mill Creek, 76 souls, simply vanished. The pattern was undeniable. Every 31 years, people disappeared near those exact coordinates. Every time, settlements were found and then lost again. The next incident should have happened in 1983, but I found no records. Either it hadn't occurred, or more likely, it had been covered up more effectively. Back in my quarters, I created a timeline on my wall, connecting the incidents with red string. The method looked like something from a movie about conspiracy theorists, but it helped me visualize the pattern. I covered my window with a blanket to keep anyone from seeing my work. Torres noticed the changes in me first. We were cleaning weapons after a training exercise when he leaned closer. "You look like hell," he said quietly. "You sleeping at all?" "Enough," I lied, continuing to disassemble my rifle with mechanical precision. "This about what happened? The town?" I looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "We can't talk about that. We can't pretend it didn't happen either," Torres said. "Something took those kids. Same thing probably took those people in 1952. I wanted to tell him everything I'd discovered, but Harrison's warning about the non-disclosure agreement hung over me. "Just focus on the job, Corporal." That night, I woke suddenly at 2:13, the red numbers of my alarm clock burning in the darkness. The air felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I lay perfectly still, listening. A soft scratching came from the corner of my room like fingernails on drywall. I turned my head slowly, eyes straining in the darkness. Nothing was there, but the scratching continued. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, but as my fingers touched the switch, the scratching stopped. Complete silence fell over the room. The kind of silence that feels like a held breath. "Who's there?" I whispered. A whisper answered from directly beside my ear. "We see you." I yanked the lamp chain, flooding the room with light. Empty. Completely empty. I searched every corner, checked under the bed, opened the closet. Nothing. These incidents multiplied over the following weeks. Footsteps in empty hallways that stopped when I turned around. Reflections in windows that didn't match my movements. Whispers from air vents that spoke my name with terrible familiarity. My squad noticed. During patrols, I'd catch them exchanging worried glances when I jumped at shadows or stopped mid-sentence to listen for voices only I could hear. Kim approached me in the mess hall, sliding her tray across from mine at an otherwise empty table. "The whole squad's worried about you," she said bluntly. "You're not right, Staff Sergeant." "I'm fine. You checked your 617 times during yesterday's patrol." I counted. I put down my fork. "Maybe I'm just being thorough. Or maybe you think something's following you." Kim leaned forward. "We all saw what happened at that town. We all signed the same papers. But some of us are handling it better than others." "You think I'm cracking up," I said flatly. "I think you need to talk to someone, a professional." I laughed bitterly. "And tell them what? That I'm being stalked by people with sewn mouths and missing eyes from a town that doesn't exist?" Kim's face softened. "Those kids were already gone before we got there. You know that, right? Whatever happened to Jake had already started happening to the others. There was nothing you could have done." But I didn't believe that. I couldn't. Because if it was true, then the voice in my head that whispered I could be next might be right. The evidence wall in my room grew more complex. I connected the 31-year cycle to lunar calendars and solar events. I researched indigenous legends about spirits that stole eyes to see the mortal world. I documented every strange occurrence in a journal with obsessive detail, times, locations, sensations. I operated on minimal sleep, surviving on coffee and determination. The base doctor prescribed sleeping pills that I pretended to take, but actually added to my investigation supplies. I knew I'd need to return to that place eventually, and I needed to be prepared. My behavior didn't go unnoticed by command. 8 days after my conversation with Kim, I was summoned to Colonel Harrison's office. "Close the door," he said when I entered. I did as ordered, noting the thick file on his desk with my name clearly visible on the tab. "Take a seat, Staff Sergeant." I sat at attention, back straight, eyes forward. "I've received concerning reports about your behavior lately," Harrison said, opening the file. "Erratic actions during patrols, inappropriate questions to civilians in Fairbanks, unauthorized access to historical archives and military databases." He looked up at me. "You're investigating Mill Creek against direct orders." "No one ordered me not to research local history, sir." The technicality was thin, but it was all I had. Harrison closed the file. "You know exactly what you're doing, Reeves, and it stops today." "Sir, with respect, people are missing, American civilians, and they're not the first ones. It happens every 31 years, like clockwork, 1891, 1922, 1952, and I'm betting 1983 as well, though someone made sure those records are buried deep." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Harrison said, his voice hardening. "You're constructing elaborate conspiracy theories based on unrelated historical events." "Unrelated?" I leaned forward. "Same location, same pattern of disappearances, same reports of settlements that vanish. That's not coincidence, sir." Harrison stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the mountains visible in the distance. "I'm giving you a direct order, Staff Sergeant. End this investigation immediately. Remove whatever collection of evidence you've accumulated in your quarters. Return to your duties with your full attention. If you cannot or will not comply, I will have no choice but to recommend psychological evaluation followed by potential court-martial proceedings." "You know what we saw was real," I said quietly. Harrison turned back to me. "What I know is that I have a non-commissioned officer experiencing combat stress-related delusions that are affecting his ability to lead his squad." "They're not delusions. Then prove it. Show me this town. Take me to these eyeless figures with sewn mouths." His tone wasn't mocking, just tired. "You can't, because when we returned with a full platoon, there was nothing there." I stood up. "Sir, request permission to speak freely." "Granted." "Something took those teenagers. The same thing that took 76 people in 1952. It will happen again in 2014, and I think whatever it is, it's not done with us. I've been seeing things, hearing things. I'm not the only one either. Torres and Kim have both mentioned strange dreams. Thompson found stitches in her pillow last week." Harrison's expression darkened. "These are the ramblings of a man who isn't sleeping enough, Reeves. As your commanding officer, I'm ordering you to take 3 days of mandatory rest, starting now. Return to your quarters, get some sleep, and when you come back, I expect this obsession to be behind you. And if it isn't, then your career in the United States Army is over." Harrison sat back down. "Dismissed, Staff Sergeant." I saluted and left his office, my mind racing. 3 days. I could use that time to organize my research, to prepare for whatever came next. Harrison thought he was giving me time to come to my senses, but he was actually giving me exactly what I needed: time away from daily duties to focus entirely on the investigation. Back in my quarters, I spent hours organizing my notes and evidence, creating backups on encrypted drives that I hid throughout my room. If they came to confiscate my research, they wouldn't find everything. Exhaustion finally caught up with me around 1 in the morning. I lay down fully clothed on top of my blankets, setting an alarm for 5 a.m. Just 4 hours of sleep, then back to work. Sleep came instantly, pulling me under like a stone dropped in deep water. The sound that woke me wasn't my alarm. It was a soft, wet noise, like someone sucking air through a small hole. My eyes opened to darkness. The lamp I'd left on was now off. The red numbers on my clock read 3:23 a.m. I lay completely still, listening. The wet sucking sound came again from the foot of my bed. A shadow stood there, darker than the surrounding darkness. A human-shaped silhouette that seemed to absorb what little light came through my covered window. I couldn't move. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that coursing through me, but because my limbs felt weighted down, paralyzed. The figure took a step closer, moving to the side of my bed. As it leaned down toward me, moonlight from a crack in my window covering fell across its face. The mouth was sewn shut with thick black thread, the stitches crude and uneven. Where eyes should have been were empty sockets, not bloody or wounded, but smooth and dark as if the eyes had simply ceased to exist. I recognized the face despite its horrific alterations. Jake Sullivan bent closer, the sucking sound coming from his nostrils as he struggled to breathe without the use of his mouth. My paralysis broke in a rush of adrenaline. I scrambled backward, hitting the wall behind my bed. My hand found the lamp and yanked the chain. Light flooded the room, revealing nothing but my empty quarters. The space where Jake had stood seconds before was vacant. No footprints on the carpet, no disturbed air, nothing to indicate he'd been there at all, except the lingering sound of that awful wet breathing that took several seconds to fade away. I sat against the wall, heart pounding, sweat soaking through my t-shirt. This wasn't a dream or hallucination. Jake Sullivan had been in my room, watching me with eyes he no longer possessed, and that could only mean one thing. The town wasn't finished with me. I sat against the wall until dawn broke, afraid to move, afraid to blink. Something had followed me back from that town. Something wanted me to know it wasn't finished. I waited until the base came alive with morning routines before making my decision. Harrison had given me 3 days of mandatory rest, effectively removing me from duty. 3 days when no one would expect to see me anywhere. 3 days to act. I showered and dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a thermal shirt, and my most broken-in hiking boots. From my closet, I retrieved my personal survival kit, compass, matches, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, and a hunting knife with a serrated edge. I packed these into a black backpack along with energy bars, beef jerky, and 2 canteens of water. The motor pool was my next stop. I walked with purpose, nodding to the few soldiers I passed as if I had every right to be there. The duty sergeant was on coffee break, leaving a private manning the checkout desk. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," I said, showing my ID. "Need to sign out a vehicle for a recon assignment." The private looked uncertain. "I don't see anything scheduled." Last-minute request from Colonel Harrison. Need-to-know basis. I held his gaze steadily, projecting an authority I no longer officially had. He hesitated, then pushed the logbook toward me. "Just need your signature, Staff Sergeant." I signed for a standard-issue Humvee, choosing one from the back row that wouldn't be immediately missed. The keys felt heavy in my palm, physical proof of my insubordination. The equipment room presented a similar challenge, but military efficiency worked in my favor. Personnel expected orders to be followed without question. I requisitioned night vision goggles, a GPS unit, and extra batteries without raising suspicion. Each item I took pushed me further toward a court-martial if I was caught, but that seemed insignificant compared to what waited in those woods. I drove off base at noon, taking back roads to avoid checkpoints. The Humvee handled the rough terrain easily as I headed northeast toward the coordinates that had been burned into my memory. My hands were steady on the wheel, despite what I was risking. My career, possibly my freedom, maybe even my life. The daylight hours gave me time to think, to question my own sanity. What if Harrison was right? What if I was suffering from some stress reaction that made me imagine Jake Sullivan standing in my room? But then I remembered the families of those missing teenagers, their grief, and the identical stories of strange behavior before their children vanished. I remembered the newspaper from 1952 and the pattern of disappearances that stretched back over a century. Doubt might have been healthier, but certainty drove me forward. I reached the general area by late afternoon, parking the Humvee a mile from the exact coordinates and continuing on foot. The forest grew dense around me, pine trees stretching toward a darkening sky. I walked slowly, conserving energy, marking my path by cutting small notches in trees with my knife. Night fell as I neared the coordinates. I stopped to put on the night vision goggles, and the forest transformed into shades of green and black. The familiar weight of the equipment on my face was oddly comforting. Military technology against whatever waited ahead. At the exact spot where the town had stood, I found nothing but unbroken forest, just as before. No buildings, no streets, not even a foundation stone. I walked the perimeter anyway, following the GPS coordinates I'd memorized from our previous visits. Where the main street should have been, I cut deeper marks into trees, creating a path I could follow back. Midnight came. I checked my watch repeatedly as the hands aligned at 12. Nothing changed. The forest remained a forest, indifferent to my presence or expectations. I sat on a fallen log, drinking water and eating a protein bar while formulating my next move. Maybe the town only appeared under specific conditions, certain days, certain times. Maybe it responded to the number of people present, or maybe it chose when to reveal itself. "I know you're here," I said aloud, my voice strange in the quiet forest. "I've seen what you do. I've seen what you take." Only cricket sounds answered me. I stood and continued walking, following the path where the main street had been. The night vision gave everything a surreal quality, shadows moving unnaturally as tree branches swayed in a light breeze. Then I saw it, a faint green glow ahead that wasn't from my night vision. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied. I moved toward it cautiously, one hand on my knife. The glow came from a window. As I approached, a house materialized where nothing had been seconds before, a 2-story clapboard structure with a front porch and shuttered windows. I recognized it immediately as the blue house we'd first entered when discovering the town, where we'd found the newspaper from 1952 and the half-eaten meal. Just one house, standing alone in the forest, as if the rest of the town had been erased, but this single building remained anchored to our world. I removed the night vision goggles, finding I could see the house, clearly now, illuminated by lights from within. The forest around it remained dark, but the house glowed with warm yellow light that spilled from its windows onto the needle-covered ground. Every instinct told me to run, to return to the Humvee and drive back to base. Instead, I approached the front steps, testing each one with my weight before committing. The wood felt solid beneath my boots. The porch swing moved slightly in the breeze, chains creaking. At the door, I paused, listening. No sounds came from inside, no voices, no movement, no hint of who or what waited for me. I tried the knob and found it unlocked. The door swung open on silent hinges. The interior looked exactly as I remembered. Living room to the right, dining room to the left, stairs straight ahead leading to the second floor. But the details had changed subtly. The newspaper that had lain open on the armchair was now folded neatly on a side table. The plates that had held rotting food were clean and stacked in a china cabinet. I moved through the rooms cautiously, knife in hand. The dining table was set for dinner with 5 extra places, added to accommodate guests. Names were written on small cards at each setting: Emma, Tyler, Ashley, Connor, Jake. On the living room walls hung family photographs in simple frames. I stepped closer to examine them, then stepped back in horror. They showed a family of 4, father, mother, 2 children, posing stiffly for the camera. Standing behind them were the 5 teenagers, their faces expressionless, their eyes normal but their mouths sewn shut, with the same crude black stitches I'd seen on Jake. The photo was dated 1952. I checked other frames. Each showed the same impossible scene. The teenagers integrated into family portraits from 70 years ago, always with their mouths sewn shut, always with their eyes intact, and staring. Something creaked above me. The unmistakable sound of a floorboard taking weight. Someone was upstairs. I moved to the staircase, each step a conscious decision against self-preservation. The stairs didn't creak under my weight, seeming to swallow the sound of my ascent. At the top, a hallway stretched in both directions, with 4 doors leading to different rooms. A soft scraping sound came from behind the door at the end of the hall. The master bedroom, if I remembered correctly. I approached slowly, counting my breaths to steady my racing heart. The door stood partially open. Through the gap, I could see a portion of the room, a corner of a neatly made bed, a dresser with a doily runner, and the edge of a vanity table with an oval mirror. The scraping sound continued, rhythmic and purposeful. I pushed the door open wider. An elderly woman sat at the vanity, her back to me. Her hair was white and pulled into a tight bun. She wore a high-necked dress of dark fabric that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her hands worked methodically at something reflected in the mirror. In the mirror's reflection, I could see what occupied her, a face that looked exactly like mine. But in the reflection, a needle flashed in her gnarled fingers as she pushed it through the lips of my image, pulling black thread tight with each stitch. My reflection's eyes were wide with pain and terror as its mouth was slowly sewn shut. A burning sensation spread across my own lips, intensifying with each stitch she made in the reflection. I touched my mouth and found it intact, but the phantom pain felt real, each puncture of the needle sending fire across my skin. The woman stopped sewing and turned slowly toward me. Where her eyes should have been were empty sockets, smooth and dark like perfectly formed holes in reality itself. "You came back," she said, her voice like paper being crumpled. "They rarely come back willingly." I tried to speak, but the burning in my lips made it difficult. "What are you doing to me?" "Preparing you," she said simply. "The town needs new residents every 30 years, new eyes to see through, new voices to speak through." She stood with unnatural smoothness, no creaking of aged joints or hesitation in her movements. In her hand, she held something that looked like a silver spoon with sharpened edges. "Your friend Jake gave us his eyes," she said, moving closer. "But we need more, always more." I backed toward the door, but my legs felt leaden, unwilling to move quickly enough. "The town chose you the moment you first saw it," she continued. "It always chooses those who notice it, those with the sight." She raised the silver tool. "Your eyes will serve us well, Staff Sergeant Reeves." My back hit the door frame. The woman was only feet away now, the silver tool catching light as she extended it toward my face. I felt a pressure against my eyelids, though she hadn't touched me yet, as if my eyes were already responding to her will. My hand found the kerosene lamp on the small table beside the door. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it against the wall behind her. The glass shattered, spraying kerosene across the wallpaper and curtains. The flame caught immediately, racing up the dry fabric in bright orange tongues. The woman didn't turn to look at the fire. Her empty eye sockets remained fixed on me as flames spread rapidly across the room, catching the bed linens and the wooden floor. "The town always returns," she said calmly, as fire engulfed the space between us, "and it never loses what belongs to it." Heat pushed me backward into the hallway. Smoke began filling the upper floor, thick and acrid. I turned and ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Behind me, I heard no cries of alarm or pain from the woman, only the roar of the growing fire. The downstairs rooms were filling with smoke too, flames already visible at the top of the staircase. I ran for the front door, yanked it open and burst onto the porch. The military police were waiting for me when I staggered back to the Humvee at dawn. My unauthorized borrowing of government property hadn't gone unnoticed for long. I was escorted back to Fort Greely in handcuffs, still smelling of smoke and forest, my mind replaying the eyeless woman's words over and over. The town always returns, and it never loses what belongs to it. I spent 3 weeks in detention while the Army decided what to do with me. Colonel Harrison visited only once, his disappointment evident in the deep lines around his mouth. "You've given me no choice, Reeves," he said, standing rigidly on the other side of the table. "Theft of military property, going AWOL, disobeying direct orders. It's enough for a court-martial." "Did they find it?" I asked. "The house I burned down?" Harrison's expression hardened. "There was no house, no fire, no town, just you, alone in the woods having what appears to be a psychotic episode. I know what I saw. What you think you saw has no bearing on reality." He placed a folder on the table between us. "I've arranged an alternative to court-martial, medical discharge. You'll receive treatment for PTSD and transitional assistance." "PTSD?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "It's the most generous interpretation of your behavior." Harrison pushed the folder toward me. "Sign these papers. Get help. Move on with your life." I wanted to tell him about the eyeless woman, about the silver tool she'd raised toward my face, about the photos showing the teenagers with their mouths sewn shut in 1952. But I knew how it would sound, so I signed the papers, accepting the official story that I was simply a soldier who'd cracked under pressure. 8 months later, I unlocked the door to my apartment in Seattle's Wallingford neighborhood, grocery bags balanced in one arm. The small one-bedroom was nothing special. Beige walls, secondhand furniture, a view of a brick wall across the alley. But it was 1,500 miles from Alaska, and that was what mattered. I locked the door behind me, sliding all 3 bolts into place. Habit made me check the windows next, ensuring each was secured with both the standard lock and the additional wooden dowels I'd placed in the tracks. Only then did I move to the kitchen to unpack my groceries. The VA therapist said these security rituals were common with PTSD. She didn't know I wasn't afraid of burglars or random violence. What I feared couldn't be kept out by locks and bars. I put away the food methodically. Canned goods, organized by content, refrigerator items arranged by expiration date. Order helped keep the chaos at bay, at least during daylight hours. Nights were different. In darkness, I saw them. Faces pressed against windows that were 15 stories up. Shadows that moved independently of any light source, and worst of all, my own reflection in mirrors and glass, showing stitches that weren't physically present on my mouth. I avoided mirrors now. I shaved by touch, cut my own hair with clippers, and kept the bathroom mirror covered with a towel. When I accidentally caught my reflection in store windows or car doors, I looked away immediately, afraid of what might be staring back. The job at the shipping warehouse suited me well enough. Physical labor, minimal interaction with co-workers, no need to explain the bags under my eyes or why I jumped at sudden movements. The manager valued my military precision and didn't ask questions about the honorable discharge that felt more like exile than recognition of service. I microwaved a frozen dinner and ate standing at the kitchen counter, scanning headlines on my tablet. Old habits from my investigation hadn't died. I still tracked missing persons cases across Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, still researched indigenous legends about spirits that stole eyes and voices. Sleep came reluctantly that night, as it did most nights. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths the way the VA therapist had taught me. 143 breaths later, I drifted off. The dream was always the same. I stood in the town's main street, alone under a sky that was neither day nor night but some impossible twilight. Houses lined both sides, perfect and pristine, with lights glowing warmly in every window. I walked toward the blue clapboard house at the end of the street, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. Inside, the eyeless woman waited at her vanity, needle poised. But when she turned, it wasn't her face I saw, but my own, eyes gone, mouth sewn shut, silently screaming. I woke, gasping, sheets tangled around my legs, sweat soaking through my t-shirt despite the cool air from the open window. Open window. I froze, suddenly alert. I never left windows open, especially at night. Yet the window across from my bed stood open 6 inches, curtains moving gently in the breeze. I got up carefully, crossing the room in 3 quick strides to slam the window shut and lock it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I checked the other windows and door, all secure, no sign of forced entry, no explanation for how that window had opened. Morning light did little to ease my unease. I went through my routine mechanically: coffee, shower, eyes closed to avoid the mirror, dress, check security, leave for work. The warehouse kept me busy with inventory and shipments, physical tasks that demanded just enough attention to quiet my mind. When I returned that evening, something was different. The air in my apartment felt disturbed, as if someone had moved through it recently. Nothing was visibly out of place, but years of military training had honed my awareness of spaces. Someone had been here. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. But on the kitchen counter, where I was certain nothing had been that morning, lay an envelope. No stamps. No return address. Just my name written in elegant, flowing script that looked like it belonged to another century. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The paper felt strange between my fingers. Too thick, too textured, like nothing manufactured in modern times. I slid my thumb under the flap and opened it. A single photograph slipped out. The image showed Main Street of Mill Creek in perfect condition, buildings gleaming in sunlight, American flags hanging from porches, the whole scene looking like a Norman Rockwell painting of small-town perfection. But what made my blood freeze were the people. Standing in a neat row in front of the houses were Emma, Tyler, Ashley, Connor, and Jake, the 5 teenagers. They wore clothing from the 1950s, hairstyled to match the era. Their eyes were normal, alert, watching the camera, but their mouths were all sewn shut with the same crude black stitches I remembered. Behind them stood dozens of townspeople, men in period suits and hats, women in dresses with pearl necklaces, children in school clothes, all with the same sewn mouths but intact, watching eyes. I turned the photograph over with trembling hands. On the back, written in the same flowing script as the envelope, were words that made my legs give out, sending me sliding down against the kitchen cabinets to sit on the floor. March 28th, 2044. We'll be waiting for you to come home. 30 years. The town's cycle was 31 years, and the next occurrence would be 2044. I grabbed my lighter from the kitchen drawer and held the flame to the corner of the photograph. It caught quickly, the paper curling and blackening. I dropped it into the sink as it burned, watching until nothing remained but ashes that I washed down the drain. But I knew destroying the image meant nothing. The town had found me. Across 1,500 miles and 8 months of running, it had reached out to remind me that I belonged to it now, just as the eyeless woman had said. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat at my small desk, opened my laptop, and began a new document. At the top, I typed, Mill Creek, Methods of Defense Against Non-Physical Entities. If the town was coming for me, I wouldn't go easily. I wouldn't end up standing vacant-eyed in some photograph with my mouth sewn shut, unable to scream. I researched protective symbols from dozens of cultures, focusing on those meant to guard against spirits that stole parts of the human body. I ordered books on ancient banishing rituals and protection spells, not because I believed in magic, but because I'd seen enough to know that conventional weapons wouldn't work against whatever lived in that town. I mapped ley lines across North America, tracking energy points that intersected near Mill Creek's location. I studied accounts of similar phenomena worldwide, places that appeared and disappeared, taking people with them. When sunlight broke through my blinds, I was surrounded by printouts and notebooks filled with cramped writing. This would be my life now, working at the warehouse by day, researching by night, preparing for 2044. The phantom pain around my eyes and mouth came and went. Sometimes I felt the pressure of stitches pulling at my lips when I spoke. Sometimes my vision darkened around the edges as if something were slowly taking my sight from the outside in. I ignored these sensations, pushed through them. I started training my body as well, returning to military exercise routines, adding martial arts classes, learning meditation techniques to control fear and pain. Knowledge and physical preparation became my shields against the dread that threatened to consume me. I found others online who had encountered places like Mill Creek, towns, houses, even entire landscapes that shouldn't exist. Most were dismissed as mentally ill, their stories buried under diagnoses and medications. I reached out carefully, using secure channels and coded language. A professor in Massachusetts who'd lost her research team in a town that vanished from Vermont. A park ranger in Wyoming who found hikers standing motionless in a meadow that appeared on no maps. A police officer in Oregon who investigated missing teenagers and found them returned with subtle wrongness in their eyes and movements. We shared what we knew, building a fragmented understanding of what we faced. The entities fed on perception. They needed human eyes to see the world, human mouths to influence it. They created these pocket realities as traps, places just wrong enough to draw curious humans in. I tattooed protective symbols on my arms and back, ancient signs meant to guard against possession and spiritual theft. I lined my apartment with salt and iron. I studied lucid dreaming to fight back in the dream space, where the town's influence seemed strongest. 30 years suddenly felt like too little time to prepare. On the anniversary of my first encounter with Mill Creek, I woke to find a thin black thread on my pillow, curved in the shape of a smile. I burned it and scattered the ashes. The town was patient. It had existed for over a century at least, claiming victims in careful 31-year cycles. It could afford to wait, but so could I. The entities had claimed many victims over the years, taken many eyes and voices, but I was determined not to be next. Whatever waited for me in 2044, I would be ready. I taped a note to my bathroom mirror, visible through the towel that covered the glass. They want your fear more than your eyes. Fear was their true harvest. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction again.